This show has been brought to you in part by Bogart Extractors, an industry leader in hydrocarbon extraction. Over the last decade, Bogart has implemented many new technologies which have helped to revolutionize the way hydrocarbon extractions are performed. Each unit is made from sanitary stainless steel and is built and tested right here in the USA. Their certified systems for use in licensed facilities meet all NFPA and ASME standards and undergo peer review by a third-party engineer to ensure your facility and its employees can operate safely. Beyond simply making a functional extractor, Bogart has many additional features which make extraction using one of their machines a faster and more cost-effective process than would be possible on comparable machines from other manufacturers. These features include hydrocarbon falling films to supercharge evaporation rates, heavy-duty explosion-proof pumps for flammable liquid or vapor, industrial chillers capable of maintaining large tanks of solvent at temperatures well below negative 60 degrees centigrade, and more. Bogart can also offer extensive tech support and consultation services. Whether you need to set up an extraction lab from scratch or just need some replacement gaskets, give Bogart a call at 855-553-3887 or check out the website at www.bogart.com.
Does anyone speak English here?
Yeah,
Tell me quickly, are you all right?
I'm alright.
Trapped in there.
I smoked weed 420. Cannabis legalized in
I don't know whether cannabis is licensed. I'm glad that's all you're thinking about.
Well, hello everyone and welcome. Again, this is Larry Mishkin of Mishkin Law in Chicago. I am joined by my co-host Rob Hunt today of Linnae Holdings out in the San Diego area. Rob, how are you doing?
I'm terrific, and I gotta say that anytime we get to listen to a really fun clip followed by the breakout of Loose Lucy from the Cap Center puts me in a great mood for the rest of the show.
Oh, there's no doubt, and we'll get back to that first clip in a second. But that Loose Lucy is really special. I think for a lot of Deadheads, it's a well-loved tune. It's a Jerry tune. It's got a great history behind it. But the Dead played it, and then they stopped playing it after their show on October 19th, 1974. And this is why you go to a Grateful Dead show when it's nearby, because you just never know. And on March 14th, 1990, which is the show we're going to feature later on today's show, lo and behold, Jerry pulls out Loose Lucy. No prior warning, no nothing. 15 and a half years later, and you can hear the way the crowd reacts. You were there, Rob. Tell me what it was like.
Well, point of clarification, I wasn't there on the 14th. I got to hear about it when I got there on the 15th, and all anyone talked about is Loose Lucy was broken out last night. So I had the tapes of it by the 16th, and I got to sit there and listen to it in the car in the parking lot going, I can't believe I missed this one. But 979 show break between performances is a pretty big breakout. I'll say this: I think I saw the next one they played and the one after that, because I saw a lot of that 1990 style spring tour. But that crowd, there's a couple great highlights from that run at the Cap Center. But the breakout of Loose Lucy's got to be right up there with the best one.
Yeah, I mean, you just love a crowd that reacts like that. And the Cap Center was always a place, Washington D.C. for that matter, where Jerry and the boys just really like to break out tunes all the time. And of course, for many deadheads who are sitting there listening to that date, December 14th, excuse me, December 14th, March 14th, 1990, and wondering why it sounds so familiar, it's because the very next night, Phil Lesh's birthday, it's his 50th birthday, I believe. March 15th, 1990, is a show that the Dead released a number of years back under the banner Terrapin Station. It comes in some fancy artwork, and supposedly some of the proceeds were going to go to build the Terrapin Center or whatever it was going to be called that they never quite got around to building. But that's an awesome show in its own right that we'll probably get to someday. But in looking at show and considering that one, all the comments that I saw took me back to the day before and to the Loose Lucy and the other clips from that show that we'll play in a few minutes. So it's great, and we all love it, and it's a lot of fun to talk about. But what about that introduction, Rob? What about this guy who's trying to escape the shelling? He's Ukrainian. He's trying to escape the shelling. And they're asking him what's going on, and it's hard to hear it at first, but his first response is, "I smoke weed 420." And then he goes on to say that, legal cannabis, and the interviewer doesn't know what to make of it. What were your thoughts?
My thoughts for this is terrific. I mean, if you listen to the entire clip, and I've listened to it a couple times now, essentially it was a reporter that, as you said, was trying to catch this guy as he was fleeing. And his response was really, everything's going to be just fine. We're going to get through this, and then sort of, and the way I can show that to you is I'm sitting here smoking joints, getting high. There's a war going on, but we're going to be okay. Let's think about other things. And I think it's obviously gone viral in the cannabis community. I think there's it's being posted by everyone from a lot of the bigger CEOs, just going, hey, here's a way to support cannabis legalization. It's, even in the worst of times, cannabis helps you get through some bad ones. So I love that clip.
I just think it's tremendous, and all personal preferences aside, you're absolutely right. Though in the midst of total craziness and chaos, which we talked about last week in a lot more detail, in a world kind of gone mad, and what everybody looks at is a very 21st century modern country, and all of a sudden they got bombs falling all around them, and now this week we've seen the pictures of the unfortunate families who were trying to escape and got themselves bombed into oblivion for reasons that I don't think any of us can understand. And here's somebody who's in the midst of it, and who's similarly trying to get away, but he seems to be very calm and under control, and he's willing to contribute it to marijuana. And maybe he doesn't care, maybe he's being disrespectful, I don't know, but I just love it because it's everywhere, and we see it all around the world. And I think that it speaks volumes that somebody undergoing the level of stress and anxiety that those people must be undergoing is willing and is happy to credit smoking cannabis and smoking marijuana with helping him get through those times.
Yeah, I agree, and I love the fact that it was on live TV, so there's no way to edit that out. And his message actually made it out to the masses, and as I said, it's since gone viral. So one more reason to think about legalizing, not just in the United States, but legalizing around the globe, because there's certainly a great deal of support for it in kind of that area. Like you look at what's happening in North Macedonia right now with cultivation, and hopefully we're going to see it spread to some of the other states nearby, whether it's Moldova or whether it's the Ukraine. But the legalization movement is just not just here. It is relatively universal, as demonstrated by that guy.
True, and I think you kind of touched on this before, but boy, I can't imagine a better endorsement for marijuana, right, than a guy. The shells are falling all around you, sir. How are you doing? Oh, I smoke weed, 420. That could be a tagline for somebody. And I'm not an advertising guy, but yeah, that's pretty amazing. And we all laugh, I think, and it's kind of funny, as folks who enjoy cannabis and smoke a little ourselves from time to time. We have always had this kind of a relationship where no matter where you are in the world, if somebody is willing to tell you that they do it too, you can always kind of form a bond with them. But in this case, I think what it does, for at least for me, is more than anything, it really personalizes these folks more than ever. They're not just faces of some grainy photo taken on the front page of a foreign newspaper. These are guys coming to us live, telling us what's happening, and he's proud to talk about this kind of stuff and to hold it out there. And good for him and good for the live TV for not being able to edit it out and, and allowing this message to be heard. So if you haven't found it yet, you want to hear the whole thing, you can find it on the internet. I'm not very good at finding things, but if you type Ukrainian guy 420, I smoke weed, I'm sure it will come up very quickly.
You think the Waldos ever would think that, like back in the 1970s when they coined the term 420, that would ever end up being said by a Ukrainian fleeing war from Russia? Like they've got to look at what they've created sometimes and just shake their head, going, "I cannot believe that this has taken off the way that it has over the last call it 30 years."
Well, I mean, it transcends anything else. I mean, it's become ingrained in the stoner culture. And, I can't think of any honor that could be any greater for somebody who's a member of that culture, for something that you've created, you've come up with, you've coined the phrase for whatever you want it to be. And everybody else says, yeah, that's kind of cool. Let's do, we love that. We want to be able to do that too. And I know you said that once you had a brief encounter with the Waldos, but that would certainly be a fun conversation with people to sit around and have, and just to touch on those types of issues, right?
Yeah, I got to reach back out to those guys. We got to get them on this show. I think they'd love to do it, but they are some of the funniest, wittiest. Just like it's a clown show with those guys, and I think they'd be a lot of fun.
That would be great. Right. But yeah, that is, when you think about that's how far that's come. Both on a marijuana level, but also on a personal level, that somebody could kind of casually toss something off into the world. And what was that? We were talking, what was that, the late 1970s, 1980 when they coined that phrase?
Yeah, it was. It was a long time ago, and it really didn't even start taking off as a real phrase outside of Marin County until, probably like 88, 89, where it started spreading a little further north into California. The first time I heard it was maybe 92, 93. And then like by 2000, it was just wildfire.
Yeah, it was everywhere. And that is kind of amazing. And I would be curious to know how, look, I had my group of buddies in high school. We all had our stupid little stuff that we said to one another. And, I don't think anybody in the world is particularly interested in any of that. That's kind of cool that, they played a part of the culture and they're immortalized in it forever. So that is very nice. We didn't really have a chance to talk about marijuana news last week, given our focus on the Ukraine and our similar focus on morning dew and everything that kind of means. But there are some things going on out there in the world. And I think that it's important for people to remember, Rob, that in this industry, it's not always, wine and roses or, Keef and, Rick Simpson oil, whatever you want to say. And we just have to point to what's going on up in Canada, where authorities have seized over 35 million grams of cannabis, which I think equates, they said, out to about 7,800 plants. From what I can tell, for basically violating the Canadian laws with respect to proper reporting and proper recording and all of that kind of stuff. And, to me, I just, the one thing I used to say still say to any of my clients, who are in the market to get licenses is that, for gosh sakes, this is the one industry in the world where you don't want to play loose and fast. You kind of have to respect that thin green line that says you're doing something that's already a little shaky. You don't want to get any closer to that line than you have to. And by, drawing attention to yourself by doing things that would potentially, draw attention in any other business, i.e. failure to follow regulatory rules and guidelines, you're just increasing the risk. And, these companies are well, at least the Canadian market, I don't know what the company specifically, but the Canadian market is publicly traded. What does something like this do to the Canadian market as a whole and to investor confidence in investing in Canadian marijuana companies?
Yeah, it's been a problem. It's been prevalent, not just in Canada, but, all over the place. And there's always that big question. And certain markets, I think, do a much better job in regulating it than others do. And I think that, what we're seeing in Canada, the hardest part is how do you actually identify that these guys are doing it without having real audits going into these places, having people just sort of do spot checks and showing up at your doorstep and saying, all right, let's pull the last records from X amount of dates and try to figure out where the manifests are. But, look, I've talked about this before, that for a long time in my life, I fought for decriminalization and fought for people to have the ability not to be penalized for cannabis. And now I've kind of gone the opposite direction, saying, well, if you've got the opportunity to be a legal cannabis business, then please do play by the rules, because if not, you're handing the market over to crime instead of trying to clean it, try to make it a good industry. So I think it's incumbent upon the regulators to continue to do this work, and I think that operators that are trying to walk both sides of the line need to be penalized. So I was really pleased to see the enforcement action in Canada, and hopefully California starts doing a bit more of that themselves. I look at markets like Colorado where there's very, very little in the way of diversion because they made the legal market so expansive. So they've made it where the legal market is so much more efficient than the illicit market that it doesn't entice the consumer to migrate away from the legal market, and that's the absolute key here. And Canada, I think, has a really tough time of doing that. There's such a huge ingrained legacy market that exists that to get everyone to migrate over, it takes creating a really good efficient market. And for the LPs in Canada to still kind of be sliding stuff out the back door, I mean, all they're ultimately doing is harming themselves and harming the other businesses around them that are trying to make a go of it. So I was happy to see the enforcement.
So, I mean, you make a great point, and the point is, why would they do anything that's stupid that would jeopardize their license, right? I mean, you get a license, you're able to operate, and it's not like they don't know the rules or they haven't been explained to them. And so, it kind of makes me wonder, is that a way of these people saying, directly or not, depending on how you want to look at it, that maybe there's advantages to operating in a gray or a black market that, obviously are preferred over a legal market, right? There's no regulation, no forms to fill out, no taxes to pay, no worry about whether somebody's going to come out and start looking at my plants and telling me if, they think my plants are good enough, some guy who's never seen a marijuana plant in his life. And I can imagine where a lot of these legacy people, even if they've gone public, part of it's in their blood, and part of their blood is we kind of do things our own way. And if the only thing I can think of is if they're saying, look, we're going to potentially lose our license, but so what? It's always we made more money on the black market, but of course now you've come out of the closet, so it's kind of hard to turn around and pretend like you're taking yourself back in. But I just find it hard to believe that guys who are running companies this size in a market where public trading is allowed. Maybe I'm just naive, I don't know, but that just seems to me to be very, very surprising. But either way, I think at the end of the day, what you're saying is absolutely true, and it's important that authorities enforce in these situations. And while I was always for people being able to grow independent of law enforcement, now that society has created what we've looked for, which is a market, in particular a regulated market, which is more to ensure, I think, the quality of the goods being sold than anything else. People who want to take advantage of it need to play by the rules, and if they're not willing to, then if the authorities don't enforce those rules, and all they're doing is just kind of recreating the black market on a broader scale.
Yeah, agreed. And I think we need to see a bit more enforcement across the board, or we just need to see more expansive markets. Either way, we're going to get to the place we need to be, which is full-scale legalization across the United States and Canada, but more importantly, with a consumer base that actually wants to access that market and doesn't ever look to the illicit market anymore. You can legalize anywhere you want, but if you make it impossible, or you make it, California being a prime example, where you give municipalities the option to opt out, even though the voters voted for it, and then the municipality comes back later and says, "Yeah, we voted for it, but not in my backyard," then it really doesn't legalize. Nothing happens.
Well, I think that's very true too, and another great example of that, I think, just to really quickly divert here for a minute, is what's happening in Oklahoma right now, which is the country's most business-friendly medical marijuana market. And even though it's such a wide-open market, they still are looking for ways, for purposes of curbing what they're saying is illegal activity. That they've been seized recently. I think they seized, law enforcement agencies there, $500 million worth of illicit marijuana. Now,
it's a free-for-all there.
They're coming out to shut down the illegal operators in Oklahoma. And the question is, why would you be an illegal operator in Oklahoma if licenses are available basically just by if you take the time to go and fill out the damn license?
Yeah, because they made it too easy. They gave out so many cultivation licenses. There's no one that's overseeing the program. The vast majority of what's being produced there is not in large-scale commercial cultivation facilities. It's in literally double wides. It's or old shipping containers. I've seen some of the most makeshift, sketchiest looking grows that I've ever seen coming out of Oklahoma. And so on that side of it, it's just basically glorified catch me if you can, but you don't even know where my facility is. It's out in the woods somewhere. inside an old shipping container. So there's no market like that. There's got to be something in the middle, which is, we can identify who these people are, we can still oversee it. There's got to be enough capital allocated into the government budget to allow for the proper auditing process. And it ain't metric. Let's be clear about that. There's so many loopholes in metric. There's so many loopholes in any other seed to sale tracking system that exists. As long as you're able to keep the hemp market, in parallel path to the cannabis market, where anyone can take something that looks identical and sort of bring it in and pop it hot with pesticide and say, I destroy the product, and then you destroy the hemp instead of destroying the cannabis. Tell me how metric's ever going to figure that out. Tell me how a state auditor is going to figure that out. There's so many different easy loopholes these guys are exploiting. And, as I've always said, criminals are always far more creative than guys that are legal. They'll find the loopholes. You just need to figure out, the U.S. government hires a ton of people to prevent cyber espionage by hiring the best hackers in the world. They hire the guys that would otherwise be the hacking, be doing the black hat stuff. We got to have the same thing in cannabis. We have to have the most creative criminal minds going in there and picking apart metric and saying this is exactly how they're going to screw you guys on this thing, and figuring out how to plug those holes. And so far it's just we created the market, so we're good. We've got the chain of custody, we can track it, we set up our specific thresholds. Yeah, that's not even close. It's woefully ignorant of the state regulators to actually think that if they just build something that's a simple piece of software, that's going to hold the day, and that criminals aren't going to still figure out a way to exploit the market when they know that they can still make significantly more money on the illicit market than they can the legal. There's got to be a motivation to shut this down. So it's got to be some sort of an enforcement action that makes the penalty strong enough to be a deterrent, or it needs to be a way to actually create better software, or it needs to be most importantly, I could say this over and over again, create a more efficient market. Create a market that the consumers want, the consumers will access, where the price of legal cannabis is less expensive than the price of illegal cannabis. If you can't figure that out, you will never, ever get rid of this illicit market. And, you look at Canada, that's how we started this whole thing. Drop in the bucket what they seized. 35 million? Okay, that's nothing. That's what they caught. That's like saying, we seized this much cocaine coming across the Mexican border. Okay, for every gram you catch, the 100 grams are making it through, and most of what they catch is a sacrificial lamb for the cartels anyway. They say, go ahead, pick these off so you can make your big headline, and the DEA can have their big drug bust and show the pictures of guns and bricks. That as long as my tunnels still go underneath to Tijuana, or from Tijuana, this whole thing is it's nonsensical that the governments don't actually take the time to say, okay, let's actually bring in the people that can teach us how they're going to screw us.
I think you're absolutely right about that. It's just, I think, important for people, who are looking for entry into the market. I've had clients who have come in and said, well, Illinois is too tight. California and Colorado are far too mature and established. We're going to go to Oklahoma. Anybody can get a license in Oklahoma. And the numbers, I think, right now are that they've got over 12,000 licensed businesses, marijuana businesses, 8,000 growers, 2,200 dispensaries, 1,500 processors, 103 transporters, 29 laboratories. The state, I think, only has a total population of about 4 million people to begin with. So, they've already created a problem for themselves, because like California, they're going to create a crop that's going to be far in excess of what the state can possibly consume. And so, to me, that's the first problem. But the second problem, and you pointed this out right away about why it's so important that they are, enforcing these things in Canada, that, everybody just comes back and says the real problem in Oklahoma is that the agencies aren't really trying to enforce it all. And so when you're not going to enforce it all, if I'm one of 8,000 growers in the state, and there's only 2,200 dispensaries to begin with, so my legal market is already somewhat limited. 1,500 processors, in terms of who's going to be out there and buy my stuff. I can easily see where the incentive grows very quickly for some of these companies to start selling out the back door, as it were, and do it that way. And if they realize that there's absolutely no enforcement effort, or such a minimal enforcement effort as to, really almost kind of be a joke, there's no reason for them not to do it that way.
Yeah, and I'll go a step further. If you look at what's happening with Colorado for a while, with Nebraska and Kansas, being their next door neighbors, I can't believe that Texas isn't up in arms about this. You'd think that they'd be posting people on either side of the Red River, just picking people off as they're coming across, because there's as you said, the total addressable market is the total addressable market. There's no possible way you can consume as much as Oklahoma's producing. So then the question is, no one to date, I've still yet to meet someone that's throwing a pound of weed away. I mean, maybe you have, but someone will buy it. It's going somewhere. So, my guess is it's probably going down to Texas, or it's going into Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. If the governors of Nebraska and Kansas were upset with Colorado never had that kind of a loose situation where that there was that many licenses that were popping up. These licenses, 90% of what's being produced in Oklahoma is definitely leaving that state. And the only reason you're not hearing about it is because Oklahoma's got a pretty strong, a very similar government, I should say, to the governments of the states. Those governments aren't going to lean on Oklahoma because they're kindred spirits.
Right. No, I understand, and I get that part of it. So, it just goes to show, though, right, that even if you have a legal market, that doesn't mean that law enforcement doesn't play a role. They actually play a very significant role because we need them to enforce the rules to make the overall market work. So, yeah, as always, lots of interesting things going on in the marijuana industry. I tend to chalk a lot of these stories that we see week after week up to just, growing pains, both on the side of the business people in the industry, but also certainly on the sides of the communities in which they operate and where they sell their goods. And these communities are all still in the process, I think, of trying to mentally untangle, this knot that's grown in their brain that says this thing that we were always knee-jerk against to the strongest possible extent our whole lives all of a sudden is making us a boatload of money. And it doesn't really seem to be causing all the problems that we were we were told it would cause. But it's marijuana, so what the heck? And, hopefully they'll make their ways through that. And, the Christy Noems of the world will just have to accept that if you were my governor, I'd be getting stoned every day too. So, you got to do what you got to do. The Cannabis Conference and Expo returns to Toronto June 1st through the 3rd, and there are still good booth locations available. This exciting event is free for cannabis retailers and will feature Tommy Chong receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Cannabis Industry Awards. For more information about exhibiting or to register to attend, go to ocannabis.com. That's OCANNABIZ.com.
So that actually provides a great segue, though, to getting back to the CAP Center. Because you asked me, right in the beginning, we're talking about increase in law enforcement presence. And if you were to say, what do I remember from those three shows? If you were to ask anyone that was there for those three shows, the one overarching theme of March 14th, 15th, and 16th, 1990 was, my God, how many cops there were at that place. It was Mounties on horsebacks. It was more busts than you've ever seen. That was the rest of the spring tour. All anyone talked about was the police presence in Landover was insane, and it was primarily, as you can imagine, for cannabis. So I think back and I think, okay, what a fun run when you're inside the show, but how terrifying it was when you're outside the show. Especially there's one dirt lot that the Capitol Center used to have, and that was where the shakedown was, and they were putting cameras in the light towers. There were mounted guys with billy clubs coming around clearing the lots. It was a melee. And the 15th, I think I told you via email, for Phil's birthday, people came from everywhere, and that was one of the hardest tickets that I've ever tried to get. I saw people trading their car. I saw people trading brand new pairs of skis. I saw people offering literally anything for that Phil's 50th, which, by the way, was the worst of the three nights as far as musically. But it was just it was the first band member to turn 50. It was a seminal moment. But man, law enforcement for cannabis, what a time, what a difference 32 years makes.
Yes, but, I don't even know that I can say entirely yes to that yet, right? I mean, everything that you're talking about is true, although when I was in Deer Creek this past summer to go see fish, they were pretty aggressive as we walked in, and, people pointing to pockets and wondering what's in there, and, oh, let me see in that pocket, and let me look around, and, what it does is it brings back this feeling that says, if as a community you're willing to allow a band like Phish or the Grateful Dead to come in and perform so you can reap all the tax benefits and all the incremental dollars that will be spent on gasoline, on food, on everything else, then for God's sakes, you can't send, police forces in there running around with billy clubs, busting everybody like it's, the 1950s or whatever. And, this is going to be there. What's the point? Why would you do this? Why are you creating a situation to bust out, to bring a whole bunch of kids in, and they're not harming anybody? If my experience always was, if you went back and talked to law enforcement, they'd always at the end say that the Grateful Dead fans were the mellowest fans they dealt with. They were for the most part polite. They were for the most part cooperative. There's bad eggs in every crowd,
and they weren't drunk.
And if who would these places rather have? Any one of these country acts that come in that may be a little more politically correct. But if every guy who walks in the door has been slugging down Jack Daniels all night, they're going to have a lot more trouble at that concert than they're going to have at a Grateful Dead concert.
Or any of the rowdier acts, the speed metal and just metal in general acts. There's a lot of bands where I'd be a lot more cautious if I were law enforcement. I mean, look, law enforcement in general looks for soft targets. And makes their lives easier to take down a soft target than a well-armed target. So it makes sense. The Grateful Dead fans were an easy target. But let's talk about the music from those shows, because I'll tell you, spring 1990, I think in a lot of people's minds, they'll say that was the last great Grateful Dead tour. Like top to bottom, that was the one. That was the last time that the Dead were just firing on all cylinders. Every single show was fire. I got to see a couple of the Landovers. I saw Hartford. I saw all three Nassaus. I saw the opening of the Knickerbocker. It was the first time the Knickerbocker had ever opened on 3/24, 25, and 26. I didn't see the Cops Coliseum shows up in Ontario, but I mean that tour, every single night. Obviously, the Brantford 329, which we talked about, gets all the accolades. But the opening 3 nights at the Cap Center, 3 really, really strong nights.
Yeah, it's a wonderful tour, and in fact, the Dead have released a good chunk of the tour in 2 different box sets that have come out, over the past number of years, and they really played off that way. I know one of the shows up in Canada, maybe for only the second or third time ever, they actually played the full version of Hey Jude, not just the reprise coming out of Dear Mr. Fantasy, but the entire actual song, which takes you back to Pigpen doing it in the Fillmore West in March of 1969. I think it was the 3rd show for the encore that night. And by God, it's maybe the worst rendition of Hey Jude I've ever heard in my life.
It's a disaster, isn't it?
But it's so much fun to listen to. But he's just a disaster. He is a disaster. And, Brent, by comparison, of course, is like a choir boy. I mean, with his voice, it's... But that is a great tour, and this is a wonderful show. And it's funny, you talk about the 15th being probably the least of the 3 nights musically, because that is, of course, the one that predictably they chose to release. And I happen to like it. I think it's a good show. I like the Terrapin Station on there, right? I think that it's got a lot of other good stuff. I like that in that version of Tom Thumb Blues, you've got Phil saying at the very end, I'm going back to Foggy Bottom. I love that. That's just funny. That he's kind of tuned into where he's at and what's going on. I know you were talking about the I Will Take You Home that Brent did, I think.
No, the Blowaway.
The Blowaway. I'm sorry, right. That was it. The Blowaway, right.
Yeah, the Blowaway the third night and the first set. That first set was just great first set, and the Blowaway was just absolute fire.
Well, it was a big...
Not quite as good as the JFK a couple summers ago. Summer that year. I think that 1990 JFK show was the one. But definitely a top 5 Blowaway. And the Knickerbocker a couple of days later was titanic as well.
And we've talked very much about the fact that at this point in time, although he doesn't know it and we don't know it, Brent's time is running out. And it's probably no coincidence that people talk about this being the last great tour, because after this tour they had the summer tour that culminated at Tinley Park, and we've talked about those shows and pretty much what a disaster they were just because of logistics and everything else. And we featured the Deer Creek show immediately preceding that, which was a Dave's Pick selection. But these shows, to hear the way that Brent is playing and to hear the command that he has, and in fact, Another one is.
Let's listen to some.
Yeah, let's listen to some.
Let's listen to the Never Trust a Woman, I think, from that night.
Yeah, that's a great tune, too. Go ahead, Dan, please.
Never trust a woman who wears her pants too tight. I said never trust a woman who wears her pants too tight. She might love you tomorrow, but she'll be gone tomorrow night.
So this is more than just his keyboard playing, which is exceptional. I mean, he's really fashioned himself into a vocalist. I mean, with a powerful voice, a very distinctive sound, and he could easily be playing in any blues bar in Chicago. The way he plays these tunes.
Yeah, I completely agree. That was the one part of Brent that I really missed in the remainder of the '90s is once he actually felt sort of the comfort level he was feeling in the spring of '90. I was so looking forward to seeing what the next step was. That he had 3 or 4 songs that he was consistently playing in the repertoire between that and Let It Run and Blow Away and
I Will Take You Home.
Yeah, I Will Take You Home. There was one other as well that was in there too, but and then the duets. The Give Me Some Lovin's. There's a handful of things, but the pure sort of blues that he's bringing back, like the real blues, really was the first time the band had that since Pig. So bringing back in a Never Trust a Woman was sort of the way that Jerry bringing back Big Boss Man to introduce into the lineup around that time. But those were songs that they could have just as easily been Pig singing Never Trust a Woman as it was Brent.
It's true, and the other ones you mentioned earlier they really are all great songs, and he was such a talented musician. And I think from the stories and the documentaries that we've seen that. It seemed like his biggest obstacle was always just his own self-confidence and, really taking and running it with it. And at this period of time, by God, is he running with it. And as beautiful as it is to hear, it's also bittersweet because, just as we realize he's hitting his groove, we also realize that, he's reaching the end of the line. And, you just have to, at this point, you had to be able to just enjoy him while you can and really get the most out of it. And in fact, we've talked about this too, but I think that one of the great things that Brent brought to the table and that we're about to hear in another clip we're going to run here in a minute is how well he connected with Jerry. And it really seemed like the two of them kind of played off of each other. Really, he took Jerry in directions that Jerry might not otherwise be willing to go. And I think that my impression always was that Brent felt that, Jerry really treated him like an equal, and he responded to that. They've done a lot of wonderful things, but for me, always far and away, one of the greatest things that the two of them ever did was, when they brought back yet another classic standard from our friends Traffic. So Dan, if you'll go ahead and just play this next one really fast, and we can talk about it in a minute. Okay, so besides the fact that it's a great tune and I have a problem that I can never cut my clips in the middle of lyrics or a really good jam to make them shorter, let's focus for a minute on the guitar solo that Jerry was playing at the very beginning of the clip. And right before they went back into the lyrics and the notes that he was hitting and the places he was going, I mean, that is a energetic, vibrant, creative Jerry Garcia, which can be contrasted, I think, from even what we talked about with David Gans a while back, some of the 94, 95 shows where, Jerry was kind of going through the motions, but very rarely showed that kind of energy and hit those kind of notes. And what's perfect about that for me is Jerry's just jamming and hitting note after note after note after note, and all of a sudden in comes Brent with the big organ sound and kind of like steers him right back into the lyrics. And I remember seeing them on stage doing it, and the two of them watching each other while they were playing it, and the smile on Jerry's face and the smile on Brent's face, and it was just, it's a great connection. And I was at the breakout, Dear Mr. Fantasy, at Red Rocks back in '84, and it was just amazing. Then we realized they were playing it at all, and now, by this point in time, it's so well polished and such a part of their repertoire that it's still a great bonus for me whenever they would play it.
I always loved Dear Master Fantasy. I loved it with the Jude, sort of reprise. I loved it without the Jude reprise. But again, I was saying earlier, the duets that Brent did, that's that's other. Besides Give Me Some Love, and I think that's the other one that is just the classic. And I think the interplay between Brent and Jerry all the way through the song, both lyrically and musically, was incredible. So, and first of all, I'm a huge, Steve Winwood's a huge Traffic fan, so it's easy to be excited about the song. But of all the things to pick out to put in your catalog, it was a great pick for the band.
It was a wonderful pick for the band, and I know I may have mentioned this on the show last week in a different context, but I just love how when Jerry sings it, he says, "Keep us out of this gloom," instead of "Take us out of this gloom," which was the way that Stevie Winwood originally sang it. And he's a half glass full kind of guy, and I like that about Garcia. He went beyond. He was making a happy space for everyone, and he knew it. It wasn't like he just forgot the lyric and said it wrong. I saw them play it early on. In fact, the very first time I think they played it, he said, "Keep us out of this gloom," and Brent was saying, "Take us out of this gloom." And somewhere along the way, Brent, caught up with what Jerry was saying. But, that there's just something about Garcia saying it, and I'm not going to drift off again into a diss on anybody else here. But that was the magic of Garcia, that when he sang the song, that's the way he saw it, and that's the way he sang it, and that's the message that he conveyed into the audience. And I think even if you weren't catching the fact that he was saying that word instead of another word, the whole spirit behind the song was just so happy that, it was kind of hard to imagine, there's no gloom at all around here. As long as you guys are playing, we're in a great space. The gloom only set in when they, finally got, when they would roll into the start of Throwing Stones and, okay, here we go, Throwing Stones, Not Fade Away, U.S. Blues, and we're out of here. And if that sounds a little bit jaded, I'm sorry, but after seeing that combination to close shows, probably, 50% of the shows of my last, 25 or 30 shows that I saw, sometimes you're looking for a little bit different, but
hence the expression, it's a throwaway.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. But this tune is never a throwaway, and what a pleasure to hear them play together and just sound so good like that. They're just such a good mesh of the two of them.
Yeah, I agree. And that really was, I truly believe that spring of 1990 is where the two of them together were at the absolute peak. Even going into summer tour of 1990, they're both firing on all cylinders. And the other songs I was thinking of before, was Bringing Back Easy to Love You, obviously, and then Just a Little Light. So, Brent had there's 7 or 8 songs that he was keeping in the repertoire. And Fun For Me, you're right. Yep. So there's I guess like 10 songs that were in the rotation that Brent was either singing solo or was duetting on, which is a pretty major part of the catalog at that time. It wasn't just Bobby song, Jerry song, Bobby song, Jerry song. It was there's a lot of Brent thrown there. At least a song every night.
And when you consider they throw a Phil song into the mix periodically, I mean, it was great to hear different voices singing and to see so many of them, being able to get involved like that on so many different levels, and they all had their own little thing that they were doing with it. But yeah, just great tune, great way to play it. Great ideas, and it is a tribute. I really think as to how well they were playing at that time, and what a great connection was going on. And
you look what happened afterwards. Once Brent passed, they had to fill that gap or fill that void somehow. And Phil actually got a whole bunch of new tunes over the next couple of years between Broken Arrow and Childhood's End and If the Shoe Fits. they're trying to figure out ways to replace. I mean, Vince was getting a couple songs, but mostly, kind of the bigger encore, like Beatles tunes were his. But other than that, Phil was actually getting a lot of material, I think, to try to pick up where, what we lost with Brent going.
It's true. And, we can say this about every wonderful musician, and the purpose of this show is not just necessarily to focus on Brent, but that's where it's kind of taken us for the moment, so we'll play it out for a second here. But, he was my original keyboardist when I first started seeing them, same with you. And, I never had Keith Gouchow to compare him against. I never had the privilege of seeing Pigpen or TC, when they were back there doing the keyboards for the band and everything. So for me, it was always just about Brent, and I appreciated the effort that Vince put in afterwards. We spent an episode or two talking about that, and I'm sure we will again someday. But Brent was just such a dynamic force. For instance, I really wonder, how much of a role, and I think it was a big role that he played in Jerry having the confidence to come back and pull out a tune like Loose Lucy after 15 plus years. I think a lot of that came from playing with Brent and kind of the energy and the excitement he was getting from Brent. And, it was certainly a good run of shows, and there's every reason to go back and start pulling out good tunes. But, I don't want to give Brent too much credit, but I just think that, Jerry was in a happy place. And when Jerry was in a happy place, he tended to dip into the catalog and see what else he could come up with more frequently than other times.
Yeah. Again, I definitely make the strong recommendation of go back and listen to all three of those nights. There's a handful of real highlights. The Blowaway of the third night is definitely one of them. But the Scarlet Fire, I think, on the third night as well was a great way to open the second set. So there's a handful of highlights that are worth listening to. So it's not just about the 14th. The 14th, 15th, and 16th as an aggregate are definitely worth checking out. And I think we do have a little bit more to listen to, and it's a song. I mean, I'll let you cue it up in a minute, Larry. But Black Muddy River as an encore, I think, is another one of those songs, much like we've discussed with Black Peter, where it's like stuck in the slot where you're hoping for something else sometimes. Whether it's you're looking for, if you want a slow encore, Knocking on Heaven's Door, or a couple other. Would certainly get the nod as far as like what people wanted to hear. But I always loved Black Muddy. I always thought the alliteration, I always thought the sort of the images it conjured up, I thought were just so beautiful. And I think especially like in big summer tour shows, where you're thinking of the last Rose of Summer Pricks Your Finger, and so I think a couple of times they ended tours with Black Muddy as the final song, specifically because it's a great way to end a period, not just a night. And I think the one we're going to play tonight, or to play for the show, is a terrific one.
You're right, and we will get to that one in 1 minute, and thank you for setting that up. And let's not forget, though, and I do agree that Black Muddy River is a beautiful tune, and it was always a great show closer. But that final show they played at Soldier Field in '95, and it was such a bad Black Muddy River. Jerry was just struggling so hard, and after having heard it so beautifully so many times, to just kind of hear it being, and thank God for Phil, who's like, we ain't ending the tour. And as it turned out, we're not going to let this be the last song we ever play as the Grateful Dead. And they got a Box of Rain in there as that rare second encore. And so that was wonderful too. We're running out of time. Just a couple of things I just want to touch on really quickly that will just kind of bounce through. After we talked about Barton Hall last week in the Morning Dew, and we kind of had this little question about whether people think it's the best show ever because of the Morning Dew, I happened to find a clip online the other day, and it was titled "The Best 2 Minutes in the History of the Grateful Dead." And what it is there's no video from Barton Hall, so the guy plays a clip from Barton Hall that he thinks is the best 2 minutes in the history of the Grateful Dead, and shows the band, and he says what he's doing. He shows them playing like from behind, like a clips from the Grateful Dead movie, where they're obviously them playing, but they're not playing the Barton Hall. But nevertheless, to my surprise, the 2 minutes was like the last 2 minutes of Fire on the Mountain. It wasn't the Morning Dew. It was just this jam, that closed out the last 2 minutes of Fire on the Mountain. It's beautiful. And so it did cause me to go back and listen to it again and kind of reconsider that. Overall on par, that is just a tremendous show from top to bottom. And while the Morning Dew definitely did add a real kicker and kind of put it over the top, there are plenty of good parts of that show that stand on their own as well.
I'm a firm believer that the best 2 minutes, the last 2 minutes of A Fire on the Mountain of all time would be 10-14-94. I think those last 2 minutes of that fire blow away any fire I know of. Not the whole song, but just those last 2 minutes, the build up and the crescendo. But, again, I'm a product of the 90s.
That's funny. Just really quickly, in terms of the world of Grateful Dead music, Phil just announced that Phil and Friends is going to play at the Telluride Bluegrass Festival this year in June. I've never been to Telluride, but I've heard it's a beautiful place. The Dead had a memorable run of shows there in the late 1980s and literally shut down the town for a couple of days, I believe. But to anyone who's out that way and is otherwise inclined to go to a bluegrass festival, and it's a great festival on its own, obviously, but with Phil and Friends there, it'll certainly be great. And I'm a lucky guy because this Friday night I get to go see Bobby with Wolf Brothers at the Chicago Theater, and I give a quick thanks and shout out to my good friend Bob Hoban, who is going to be in town on business that week. Bob has been a guest on our show before, has his own podcast, The Hoban Minute, that focuses on marijuana issues, and he's a big Bob Weir fan. We've talked about and gone to shows together and had these discussions all the time. But he's going to be here. He got tickets and he reached out. So I'm very appreciative to Bob. I look forward to going and be able to update everybody on our next show about that. And so many other good things coming up. And we're going to be making our announcements soon about some of our new guests. So please stay tuned because you're going to really love it. Otherwise, that's everything I got, Rob. I hope you're doing well out there. To all of our listeners, have a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Please enjoy this clip of Black Muddy River closing out the Grateful Dead on March 14th, 1990 at the Cap Center in Washington, D.C. And enjoy your cannabis responsibly.
This night will last for you. And there's nothing left to do but count the years. When the strings of my heart start to sail and stones fall from my eyes instead of tears, I will walk alone by the black muddy river and dream me a dream of my own. I will walk alone by the black muddy river, sing me a song of my own, and sing me a song of my own.
How do cannabis CEOs balance growth and optimization strategies? What is THCO, Delta-10, and CBNA, and why should you care about these minor cannabinoids? And why isn't the endocannabinoid system covered in medical school? Most people think they're up to date in trends in the cannabis industry, but they're about 6 weeks behind. Learn about what is truly next in the cannabis space by joining myself, Brian Fields, and Kellen Finney every week on the Dime Podcast, and of course, on PodConx.